Hey everyone, so with the new Batman movie coming out, I wanted to make a video about Christopher Nolan, who directed the greatest Batman films of all time and the greatest superhero films of all time, the Dark Knight trilogy. He also may just have predicted that he was going to direct those Batman films in his first feature film when he was a broke filmmaker in the UK. And I'm going to explain how that is so in this video. But in order to do so, we need to dive into Christopher Nolan's career, and there's no better way to do that than Nolan-esque style, starting in the middle and then explaining everything in reverse. So let's jump to his first Batman film, Batman Begins. It's his first major blockbuster film. He directs it for $150 million. He got the gig probably because he directed his first studio film before that, called Insomnia, with Al Pacino and Robin Williams, for $45 million. And he was able to direct Insomnia after catching the eye of director Steven Soderbergh, who encouraged him to come into the studio system after directing his second film, his indie success Memento, for only $5 million. So that's pretty amazing that within 2 films, Christopher Nolan was directing an indie feature for $5 million all the way to the first Batman film for $150 million. However, even though a $5 million budget is a small film in the eyes of Hollywood, to budding filmmakers like myself and many of you out there, we can only dream of, in the next few years, directing a $1 million budget feature film. So I myself wanted to figure out, how does a director get to that point where he or she is directing their second feature film for $1 million. So what I did is I rounded up all my favorite directors and I made it a task to watch all of their first feature films, even the ones before the ones that made them famous. And in Christopher Nolan's case, that was in 1998. He made his first feature film called Following for only $6,000. And when I finally watched Following for the first time, that's when I realized that Christopher Nolan may just have manifested his entire career in his first film. Following acts kind of like a crystal ball for his future, and it packs in so many predictions that span at least the next 15 years. So to explain those, let's go into the plot of Following very briefly. Following follows a broke and struggling writer in the UK, probably reflecting Christopher Nolan's life at that point in time. And because he's a struggling writer and struggling to come up with ideas, he just takes up the hobby of starting to follow people. But then he encounters this other man who's also a follower, but not an amateur follower, actually a professional follower, who takes him under his wing and shows him the dark underworld of following. And what he does is he actually follows people's life and their schedules, and he plans for when they're going on vacation, and he'll go and stay in their homes and steal their belongings, steal their jewelry. And the character dynamic between them, what's so important is it takes on the dynamic of basically all of Nolan's films moving forward. You have an ambitious but innocent protagonist who comes to grips with an internal identity struggle in relation to an immoral antagonist who challenges him and plays on his deepest insecurities. And you can see this just in Christopher Nolan's most mainstream films, the Batman films, right? So very similar here thematically, and that's just to point out how deep and insane this parallelism gets in Christopher Nolan's films and his life, which is something we'll get into. But the first part of the prediction Christopher Nolan makes about his future life, his career, and actually directing the Batman films in the Following comes in the art design. The protagonist, like I mentioned, he's down on his luck, doesn't have a lot of money, so all the decorations in his tiny, dingy apartment are kind of like posters and memorabilia. And on the very front door of his apartment, there's only one poster, and it's the Batman symbol. Yes, in 1998, 7 years before Christopher Nolan directed Batman Begins, in a $6,000 budget film, Christopher Nolan puts a Batman poster on the character's door. Maybe with another director you'd think, oh my god, that's amazing, that's, kind of like a cute coincidence. But with Christopher Nolan, if you watch his films, there are no coincidences. Everything acts like a parallel universe, and what's insane to say is that this is not the only foreshadowing in Following. This is not the only thing to follow in Christopher Nolan's career. Let's take the name of the antagonist in Following. This is a man who's essentially a career criminal who sneaks into other people's homes and steals their belongings, and his name is Cobb. Now, who else's name is Cobb? 12 years later, in a film called Inception that Christopher Nolan directs and writes, starring Leonardo DiCaprio playing a character named Cobb, who sneaks his way into different layers of people's dreams and steals their belongings. What's so amazing about Christopher Nolan foreshadowing his career in his first film is that it plays into the themes of not only his future films, but also his life. He's constantly grappling with this idea of duality, dual worlds, right? A real world reflecting a dream world, planet Earth reflecting life in space. Even a character reflecting an identical other character. You see this in his very first short film, his 3-minute Doodlebug, where a character is chasing something, seemingly a doodlebug, and turns out he's chasing another smaller version of himself, and he's also being followed by a bigger other version of himself. And then in terms of Nolan's big budget work, the most relevant example is in the film The Prestige, which not only reflects these sorts of themes, but I'll get to in a second, actually reflects Nolan's very personal life. So The Prestige, if you haven't seen it and you don't want spoilers, I'm gonna include the timestamp above to skip those spoilers, but basically in The Prestige, Christian Bale plays this antagonistic magician who's almost evil in his ability to pull off these insane magic tricks that no one can figure out how he does them. The only real explanation is that he must have some sort of body double that sacrifices himself in some physical way who's identical to him. But what's revealed at the end of the film is that Christian Bale's character actually does have an identical twin, and they live a double life. One of them is more in love with the wife, and one of them is more in love with his magic career. So that speaks to the theme of duality in all of Nolan's films, but how does this relate to Christopher Nolan's personal life? You might think he has an identical brother of some sort. Well, it's actually something maybe a bit more interesting. So Christopher Nolan's writing partner on a bunch of his films is his younger brother, Jonathan Nolan. However, there's a key difference between Christopher and Jonathan. Christopher Nolan was born in the UK, raised there, has a British accent, one of the most British sounding people you'll ever see. His brother Jonathan, who's 6 years younger, was also born in the UK, but raised in the US in Illinois, and he has a completely American accent, not even like a hint of British. He legitimately sounds like a frat bro. He's a Georgetown Hoya. So I can't help but feel that this relationship, even though maybe not a traumatic one, but a significant one, had a huge mark on the way that Christopher Nolan sees the world. So anyway, make of this what you will about Christopher Nolan, but my mind goes in two directions. One is that Christopher Nolan is this mysterious Illuminati type guy who has insights to parallel universes and just has an intellect greater than normal human beings. And I'm sure there will be a lot of conspiracy theories about that. But the second direction my mind goes in, which is more realistically what I believe, Christopher Nolan, this person who doesn't use email, doesn't have a cell phone, or he has sort of like a flip phone, a very basic one. He's someone who's just so committed to his craft, and everything he writes is deep work. It's so personal. He gives his entirety to it, all of his being to it, to the point where that cliche becomes a reality that his life is imitating his art and his art is imitating his life. And he just operates with such a strong vision of what he wants to do. From so early on in his career, it's almost like he couldn't help but end up make those Batman films. It's like he almost couldn't help creating that character in Inception because it was so part and parcel of who he is as a human being and what he was driving and aspiring toward. So I know it's a little bit cliche, but I like to think of it in a motivational sense that if you give enough of yourself to something, it'll have such a strong imprint on it that it will almost seem supernatural. But what's supernatural to all of us is just common and studied to Christopher Nolan.